about the content of that draft. The other thing I have on the agenda again is the statement of conflict of interest. I've talked with Josh Ward, and we think that that's probably needs to be included in all of our meetings that we have. That is a pretty standard procedure when we go to other meetings in around the state. For example, the TAC board meeting that I chair for the Southwestern Commission has that statement. So I just want to remind everybody about that conflict of interest statement that is posted in our agenda. The other thing that we have is opening statements. That's the third item on the agenda. Commissioner Hayne could not be with us tonight. He's celebrating his birthday with his wife, Betsy. We wish her happy birthday. But he did send a letter that he has asked us to read. And I'm going to ask Michael Mathis to come and read that letter. It's his opening statement.
Thank you, Mayor. So as the mayor had mentioned, I have a letter from Mark Hayne dated September 8th in reference to tonight's special meeting. The letter says, "Dear Pat, as you know, my wife Betsy's birthday is today. I will be with my wife this evening and am providing these written comments. Please have the town clerk read this letter and attached to the minutes." Of course, the town clerk's here, but she's working with the minutes and the Zoom meeting and YouTube, so she's got her hands full. Even though I've asked for all communication between the town and our attorneys on the subject of short-term rentals, I was not provided the September 1st, 2022 draft until approximately 4 p.m. on September 7th. To the best of my knowledge and belief, the draft that is being discussed tonight has not been shared with the public. This is the same discourtesy that has been extended to me since March of 2020. The evening prior to our 2020 budget workshop, I was sent a 37-page draft contract just before a 9 a.m. meeting. Then, as now, I awoke at 3 a.m. to prepare my comments. When I asked questions, I was shouted down, cursed, and outvoted 4-1. The proposed contract was not in the best interest of the town and would have resulted in a $7.38 million cost. I believe the proposal I was sent yesterday evening will also be very costly to the town. Can't we just talk to both sides in this dispute? There's no doubt in my mind that we could quickly draft new standards for the operation of short-term rentals that everyone would agree on. I would like to specify that no food be discarded when a unit turnover and the housekeeper collect the food. I would like to require a shelter for the bear-resistant containers when they are turned over. And I would like to place a sign in the units with emergency contacts. The argument for amortization of short-term rentals over 3 years is, in the opinion of some attorneys, unlawful. Proceeding in this manner will result in enormous legal fees and continued division in our community. I offered for the town board to improve healthcare in our community. The town board refuses to honor longstanding contracts to assist with housing for healthcare workers, and the town board is now faced with a housing and employment crisis. Reference is made to our recently adopted comprehensive plan. I voted against the document for 2 reasons. The plan suggests voluntary registration and limiting the minimum number of overnight stays. I felt then and feel today both of those suggestions are unlawful. Increasingly, neither proposal included in the draft that is under consideration tonight. It is difficult for me to vote to determine a short-term rental is detrimental to the health, safety, and welfare of the town, knowing several families of widows and orphans that need this income to maintain a home here. I have been asking for better zoning enforcement for over 2 years. I asked to hire a planner with a master's degree in national certification, which was not approved. I asked for more code enforcement on Friday and Saturday nights and Sunday mornings. We don't even have the staff to check on our few homes where there have been problems, and there's no one to call when garbage is scattered by the bears on Sunday morning. I believe we're inviting a lawsuit with a September 15th, 2025 drop dead date. Homestays is not included in the definition, yet specifically not allowed. There's no provision for documenting non-conforming uses and appealing the decision of the zoning administrator. We could look at a grace period for units to complete construction, and we could limit the total number of short-term rentals to a percentage of our housing inventory. I came to last week's meeting prepared to discuss both the Save Highlands and Highlands Neighborhood Association specific comments to the planning board's recommendation. Instead, we were given 9 questions I'd never seen before and asked yes or no. It seems to me we're inviting years of litigation and face economic peril if we continue down the path of amortization with no dialogue. I count 9 legal attorneys that have advised us with 3 varying opinions to say our legal team recommends the amortization approach as not being totally transparent and candid. We must approach this with polite conversation and compromise. Sincerely, Mark Hain.
Thank you, Michael, for reading the letter. I appreciate that. That's Mr. Haynes' statement. If anyone would like a copy of that letter, we have them over at the clerk's desk, and you may pick one up on your way out. The next item would be opening statements by board members. Let me just go ahead and start with my opening statement. One response to Mr. Haynes' letter, he said that at the town retreat at 2020, that he was cursed. I've been the mayor of this town for 9 years. I've never had a board member, nor have I heard at a town public meeting a board member curse another member. So I'm kind of confused about that accusation that was made. I think we have good positive relationships among the board members. I'm going to leave it at that, because I think the next thing that we will need to be doing is looking at the different aspects of this proposed ordinance. And I have questions that I'd like to ask our attorneys and share with the board. So I'm going to turn it over to the other board members and see if they'd like to make a statement at this time. No statements. Okay, let's move on to the next item, item number 4, and that's the review, the draft of short-term rental ordinance amendments. And I'd like to just turn it over to Chad Isick, the author of this draft, and we've got Jay Cowart here, if they'd like to make any opening comments about the draft that has been presented. Chad?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the town board. What's before you is, we listened intently to your discussion regarding the policy issues at your last meeting and came back with some revisions to the ordinance that was originally sent to the planning board. We did provide a draft of that as well as a red line showing some of the changes that were made. But in short, I think what we've done here is, as we've been discussing, defining short-term rental use as, less than 30 days and prohibiting that use in the R1 and the R2 districts. We have removed any permitting requirements. We removed some changes to terminology regarding zoning compliance permits, zoning certification versus zoning compliance permits. We didn't think that was necessary at this point. We deleted the definition of homestay at your direction and added that term to the definition of tourist homes, which currently is prohibited in the R1 district and requires a special use permit in the R2 district and the other districts. We have changed that use to being a limited use in the R2 district, meaning it would be subject to your same standards that you currently have for tourist homes, but would not require a special use permit. I think the direction we received was trying to get away from special use permitting altogether. And then, of course, we've included a 3-year amortization of short-term rentals at what we understood to be the direction of the council at the last work session. So, with that, we've also, if you see in the draft, we've added some whereas statements to the beginning of the ordinance to kind of further explain the reasoning and the purpose for the text change. I'm happy to answer any questions or discuss any of the policy issues or legal issues that the board would like to discuss.
Okay. Thank you, Chad. Jay, would you like to make a comment?
Jay, you're muted.
You're muted.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I think that the preamble that Chad prepared is really important to this legislation. I hope y'all have read it because this basically tells us why we're doing this, the background of what we're doing, the things that we've considered in taking this action. And at some point in time, if we do get into litigation on this, this is going to be an important factor in trying to determine whether or not we were doing this in good faith. And so please be sure you read it and you understand it. And then to be even more frank, I think that this is one of those things that will be that will help us and the court to decide whether or not attorney's fees will be awarded later on, because the standard requires careful consideration and documentation of all the reasons why you took this action. So good job, Chad.
Okay. I guess we can start with any questions that the board would like to direct toward the attorney, and attorneys, let me just start with one, and then we'll share and exchange ideas. One of the things in the previous legislation, we talked about 5 unrelated people or less being in a single family unit. Is this in this legislation, or is it addressed there? 5 unrelated. I think that's currently, Josh, in our ordinance.
Yes, it's in the definition of family.
Okay, all right.
And it is 5, correct? Amy, remember we talked
Yes.
about 3, but we left it at 5.
5.
Yeah, we didn't need it to be repeated in the short-term rental because we already added in the definitions of family, so single family.
Yep, that is correct. The definition of family has remained at 5 unrelated persons. In prior drafts, there had been some language that had limited that to short-term rentals for the R1, R2 district, but since it's being prohibited and amortized, we removed that from the standards for short-term rentals and the standards for short-term rentals in other zoning districts other than R1 and R2.
Okay, any other questions?
I have several.
Go for it.
So Chad, what you've done is you've taken out a singular definition of homestay and grouped it under, it is the same thing as a tourist home. You say it's not included as short-term rentals, it's not included in transient lodging, it's not included in hotel motels, but it is included in tourist homes, which means that that's the same definition, AKA tourist home.
Yeah, so the prior version that you had homestays essentially being defined similarly to a tourist home, but it limited it to no more than 2 bedrooms and was going to allow that in all zoning districts. The direction that we received was that you didn't want homestays, but we think we've just included that term under tourist homes, which is already a permitted use within or it's a special use currently in the R2 district, to include and capture homestays as a use, and so that would fall under a tourist home where you have, an owner or occupier or operator staying in the home, and the standards for tourist homes that are current in your current ordinance limits it to 4 bedrooms, and that would be only in the R2 district. So it made sense to include homestays under tourist homes because they're effectively the same thing, except with respect to the number of rooms that were being rented under the prior version of the ordinance, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that homestay was synonymous with tourist home. In other words, somebody couldn't say, okay, but a homestay is different than a tourist home.
Well, we've included it under a tourist home definition, that type of use, which is, renting of a bedroom, no more than 4, where you have someone staying on the property while the guests are there.
Okay, I'm sure. Now, I did have you've changed it from the tourist home from a special use permit to just a compliance, certificate of compliance. That's a pretty major change. Isn't there a North Carolina general statute that regulates inns and tourist homes? There's an inns and something else, isn't there?
Well, there's bed and breakfast inns and there's bed and breakfast homes.
Right. So in other words, tourist homes would be now under that North Carolina general statute because you're putting them in a tourist home, which probably has some inspection compliance for kitchens and such like that. I mean, I don't know. I didn't read it. I can't remember what number it is.
Yeah.
That's built into
130A-247.
130.
130A-247.
Okay. I just want to make sure that everybody understands that then they would be under that North Carolina general statute, which regulates tourist homes.
Yeah, just to be clear, I can certainly take a look at that statute. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't looked at that. To be clear, all that we have done as it relates to tourist homes was the instruction that we received was that we're trying to get away from special use permitting and special use permit process. So we just made that a limited use in the districts that it's already a special use, so that if someone comes in and demonstrates they meet the standards under the tourist home standards that are already in your ordinance, they wouldn't have to go through the special use permitting process. But I have not looked at that particular statute. I'm happy to do it and report back if that changes anything.
Yeah,
Okay.
would you do that to make sure what we're saying here comports with that statute?
That's
No, that's not the reason that we did that. No.
well, what I'm saying is if that is something that you're talking about, and I truly hate the term widows and orphans. It's like, oh, I'm an old woman, I can't take care of myself. I can't have a man to take care of me. It's not widows and orphans. It's old people on a fixed income, okay? Let's call it that, not widows and orphans. They would have to go through those more inspection standards and everything else if we did the same thing. I agree. Homestays are something that we need to really be careful with, or they will just become another short-term rental. I'm just trying to make sure that what we want to do with that isn't something so onerous for somebody who doesn't want to actually run a bed and breakfast. Anyway, that's just something we should take a look at.
Hey, Amy, can I just chime in here?
Uh-huh.
The statute that you're talking about, 138-247, is under Article 8 of the section. 138 is about public health. And this is under Sanitation, Part 6, Regulation of Food and Lodging Facilities. Basically, what this does is just the general statute requires that the Department of Public Health inspect the place for sanitation, that they have clean laboratories and disposal facilities and animal and vermin control and things of that nature. It doesn't really add so much to the local ordinance that would cause it to be confused with some other kind of zoning use. This is all about sanitation. So I don't think that's going to get in the way of the zoning regulation that we're talking about.
No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that short-term rentals don't have those public health requirements. And now you're saying tourist homes or homestays, which are very similar, are now going to have those inspection requirements. All I'm saying is if we're talking about fixed income individuals who need that extra income and want to do a homestay, I don't want to make it necessarily so onerous that they have to have that annual inspection and get a certificate of sanitation and health and all the rest of that they necessarily have to do. Maybe we do and maybe we don't. I just think that's something we need to think about more than just saying, let's just put them under bed and breakfast tourist homes and have them basically come under that statute with that short-term rentals do not come under. That's all I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah, and I think what we're doing is just defining the use, and to the extent whatever they're doing would require state regulation for sanitation, if they're serving food or whatever the case may be, that would probably be a separate issue under state law. I think what we're trying to do for zoning purposes is identify, they are essentially, if there's someone staying there and they're renting out rooms, that is essentially a homestay, and putting it all under one definition. Now, we can certainly go back and define it separately, the homestay, and limit it to the 2 bedrooms that we had before and allow it in more places. That's a policy decision for the board to make. But the instruction I think we received was that homestays, whether it's 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, or 4 bedrooms, or tourist homes, that was not desired in the R1 district.
I agree, and I'm not questioning that. I'm just trying to make sure our ordinance is clear.
Sure.
Anyway, moving on, to not have them be required for a special use permit, I think that's a major change in our ordinance, mainly because a special use permit has to find 4 or 5 things. And one of the things that it has to find is that it, if I can find it here, it will not endanger public health and safety, meets all conditions and requirements, will not substantially injure the value of adjoining or abutting properties, or alternative is a use of public necessity, location, character, and use, and the develop according to the plan. So I think my thing is if you don't do a special use permit, the specific instance that the specific case that I'm thinking of is in the R2, we have some areas, maybe even in R1, but in R2 where they are allowed, that share a driveway. If you just allow them to be used without having the neighbor who's sharing a driveway have a say, I think that's could be not something that would be desirable, because if they operate it as a ongoing all the time bed and breakfast, and I'm sharing a driveway and they can rent up to 4 bedrooms, that's a significant amount of traffic on a shared driveway. Special use permit would look at those kinds of things. Just a compliance of, for that specific property does not look at that. And I understand people want to get away from special use permits because they do have more discretionary, decisions. But I'm just saying that in our specific case, shared driveways would be something that would be not having a special use permit would not even tell the person who's sharing a driveway, suddenly I have a bed and breakfast next to me.
Yeah, and I think that's entirely a policy decision for the board on what type of requirements you want to have. One, I will throw this out. One thing you could do is you could set certain standards that would then trigger a special use permit. If you are 2 bedrooms or less, it would be not require a special use permit. If you're over 2 bedrooms, you'd have to get a special use permit, or if there's other things that would trigger the requirement for a special use permit, you could certainly consider that. That's totally a policy decision, and we can completely within your zoning authority. So whatever the board's desire is on that, we can draft it accordingly.
Okay, that's one of those problem areas I think we need to at least take a look at, so we know what we're doing and we don't have unintended consequences here. In your 6.5.18, which is your short-term rentals, and number 3, you have an application for short-term rentals zoning compliance certificate. I thought we did away with those.
Say that number again, Amy, I'm sorry.
It's the short-term rental and the 6.5.18, number 3, end of the second line down there, an application for short-term rental zoning compliance certificate. And since we don't have that defined anywhere, or the process.
Yeah, that's a good catch. It's just an oversight. We can.
Okay, I thought that's probably what it was, but
yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question,
Sure,
Commissioner Patterson?
sure.
For that too? Getting back to the tourist home, and we've limited to 4 bedrooms, and I just want to explore this. We've had bed and breakfasts here before where they had more than 4 bedrooms. What's the rationale for limiting 4 bedrooms, say if someone had 8 bedrooms in a house? Why are we saying just 4 is the cutoff?
That's what's in there now. I'm pretty sure that's what's in there now.
That's what's in there now. And if you will look that up, the general statute, it breaks it into 2 parts. As a bed and breakfast home, which is an 8-bedroom max. And then you got bed breakfast inn, which is a 12-bedroom max, according to general statute. So something to think about.
That's the new definition,
So,
which is where I'm going.
Okay, so-
As soon as you're done.
okay, yeah, I'm done for right now.
No, you go ahead.
No, I'm done for right now. I mean, that's not to say that I won't have comments on what you comment on. Yeah, so maybe that is something that we should look at, is the
Okay.
number of bedrooms. Is that what you're going to say?
Yeah, based on what state statute's definition now is
Yeah,
updated.
yeah.
Okay. Good point.
So are we making it, what are we making it? 8, 10, 12? What's the state say?
That's what I think the board would have to do. Could it be 10? Could it be 8?
I would recommend, and Chad, looking at the statute, I would probably recommend it mentioning both bed and breakfast home and bread and breakfast inn, since those are now in the general statute, probably at least cover that in the definition. And then if you wanted to do more, a maximum bedroom of 8 or 12, I guess you could, or you could follow the state, or you could, I'm assuming you could do your own, even though the state limits that, Chad, Jay?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to look at that statute, but I imagine that it's really talking about state health, public health regulations as it relates to that, which is really unrelated to the zoning aspect of it, and what you consider you want to allow from a zoning standpoint in this district. But yeah, I mean, you could define it. You could break it out into two different definitions and limit the rooms, capacity, and require one to get a special use permit, one not to get a special use permit. I think you could do either way.
I think there's a difference between or bed and breakfast home and a bed and breakfast inn.
I agree.
And I think a home might be more appropriate in residential zones and an inn less appropriate in residential zones. Because an inn is kind of more like a hotel.
Yeah.
So I think we need to think about that.
I agree.
What do you think?
An inn is at least 9, but not more than 12 guest rooms. A home is not more than 8 guest rooms.
So the only distinction is the number of bedrooms?
Mhm.
Not the only distinction, but I don't know,
Not the only distinction.
but I don't know if the rest of them even apply, because like Jay says, vast majority of it, of the 2 definitions, statute definition says bed and breakfast home means a business in a private home of not more than 8 guest rooms that offers bed and breakfast accommodations for a period of less than 1 week, and that meets all of the following criteria. And it goes into other criteria. A bed and breakfast inn means a business of at least 9, but not more than 12 guest rooms that offers bed and breakfast accommodations for a period of less than 1 week, and it meets all the following requirements. Those, the following requirements, for the most part, are, like Jay says, it falls into food service and that sort of thing, and how it's billed and stuff that we're not necessarily want to get involved in.
So you'd say we'd want to limit it to
But
8?
well, my question was going to be to either Jay or Chad, is the statute's definition of bed and breakfast home and bed and breakfast inn superior to what we would put into place?
No, I think they're defining the, I mean, my thought is, without having really studied it, is that they're defining those uses for purposes of what requirements are required for public health and sanitation. You can have your own definition from a zoning perspective as to what you want those uses, what the requirements are for those uses and what districts you want them to be allowed in, and whether or not they're required to have a special use permit or be a permitted use subject to limiting standards.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So you think there's no jeopardy in being more restrictive than the state statute in this particular case?
No,
Not from a zoning standpoint, no. From a
Okay.
definition standpoint, no.
That answers that. Still don't know what we're going to do, but that answers that.
But I hear we should look at options and research this further.
I think we just need to think about it,
Okay,
because now we know what we can think about.
okay.
Yeah.
One other
And
note
again,
that
just to be clear, I mean, if it's desire of the policy is that, we are okay with someone who's staying in their home and renting no more than 2 bedrooms, and we want to allow that in the residential districts. And then if it's someone that's doing up to 8, we're okay with that in the, I'm just saying, R2 district. And if it's above that, we want to get special use permit, for over 8 bedrooms. So I think you have options of how you want to handle it from a policy standpoint.
my request would be that you kind of outline that and put it in writing so we can respond to it and make a decision.
Yeah, because a lot of options here.
Yeah, if y'all could just capture those options and get them to us and let us make a decision based on what you've presented.
Happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. I have just one other little kind of point of emphasis. We've eliminated the 7-day minimum stay in this ordinance. We do not have that. I know Commissioner Hain was making reference to that in the comprehensive plan, but that only said could, not must, but that is an option, and we've exercised the option of not having that in this ordinance. Okay. Any other folks who would like to ask questions?
Mr. Mayor, if nobody else, I have a number of comments I'd like to make or questions to pose. On page 5, under definitions, do we think on duplex, we have a building containing 2 dwelling units? Do you think there's any benefit to, because a duplex actually is a single building containing 2 attached dwelling units? Usually that's the way it's thought of. Is there any advantage or disadvantage of having those 2 words in or out? And should we also consider triplex or quads? And I don't know if there are either of those 2 in the city limits, but there certainly could be in the future.
that's always been my understanding of what a duplex was. That's why they use the term duplex. It's 2 units in one building.
2 units with a common wall,
Yeah,
or I guess 2 units in a building,
but
upstairs and downstairs or something.
Okay. 2 complete dwelling units.
Yeah.
Including
They don't share
bathrooms,
anything.
kitchens.
Yeah, they don't share anything other than a wall
Right.
or maybe a stairway.
Okay. And then the definition of multifamily dwelling, we have it's a dwelling unit designed designed, comma, intended or used by more than one family. Should that or not be and? Because you've thrown in something there that's actually another possibility rather than a extenuating circumstance. And I'm not necessarily looking for an answer. I'm just saying this is something that caught my eye, and I thought maybe we might want to.
Are you referring to the definition of building multifamily?
Yes.
And I think the language you were referring to is being struck from the current ordinance.
No, I was
No,
looking
no.
at the red, the actual language that's left. A dwelling unit designed, comma, intended or used by more than one family.
He's reading from dwelling multifamily, not building multifamily, Chad.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I apologize.
And I agree with you, Buzz. That should be an and.
And then the definition of short-term rental and temporary guest occupancy seem to be extraordinarily the same. Short-term rental being the rental of a residential dwelling unit for compensation for a period of less than 30 consecutive days. Does not include homestays, hotels, motel, tourist home. Temporary guest occupancy, the use of a dwelling or unit in return for compensation where the occupancy of the structure by the paying guest or guest is for a period of less than 30 days. Virtually the same thing, just different words.
I think that the term temporary guest occupancy I think we use that term to generally define other types of uses like homestays that were less than 30 days, because that term was reused in the definition of like, for example, multifamily residential use. We were carving out, that are not temporary guest occupancies. But I think perhaps I'll take a look at that, but perhaps with the deletion of the homestay definition, we may not need that term any longer.
Right.
So that may be able just to come out entirely, and we can change, clean that up on the definition of wherever it's used within the definitions before that.
I wasn't necessarily so worried about the word homestay. I was more concerned that the potential short-term rental definition and temporary guest occupancy definition could be combined. Anyway, just something to think about. And I guess we've probably hashed the bed and breakfast definition, bed and breakfast home, bed and breakfast inn definition enough that it can be looked at. Under on page 10, under section 6.5.18 short-term rentals. Number one, on the second sentence, provided, however, the number of bedrooms permitted for short-term rental shall not exceed the number of bedrooms approved for the dwelling in an improvements permit issued for the property. There's a lot of properties in Highlands that don't have improvements permits because the homes were built for somebody's birthday. I think we should have something in there so that it doesn't hang on that improvements permit for homes listed or the bedrooms listed on the current tax card, whatever that may be.
Yeah. Josh, I know that that was something that you guys had talked with folks about, and that was language that came from you guys. We could certainly say or.
Well, I just think we need to give people that are not going to be able to have an improvements permit some way to verify what they have, and some way for us to be able to say, you know, just because you say it's 4 and the county says it's 2, we need to have something to hang our hat on.
So bedrooms are listed on tax cards?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
And then number 7 in that list, I guess I'm at a loss at what that paragraph actually means. What are we trying to accomplish with paragraph number 7? By saying there should be no more than one short-term rental contract governing a short-term rental during the same time period or same period of time the short-term rental is rented.
I think I can answer that.
Okay.
That my understanding is this. Let's say somebody rents for 30 days. You can't then have other contracts within that 30 days for other people
You can't
using the
sublet.
property.
It closes a loophole what people try to get around.
Okay. That's it.
Okay,
Okay.
I forgot. I needed to go back to where we took out the short-term rental zoning compliance permit in number 3 of that 6.5.18. We still need to deal with parking vehicles on the property, and it says designated in parking areas. Somewhere, somebody suggested that it was 1 per bedroom, 1 parking place per bedroom. Do we need to have a number on there for them as opposed to them putting in a compliance permit that we look at and say, yeah, that's okay? Since we're not making them do that. I think Wilmington had 1 per bedroom.
And the plan board suggested that as one of theirs.
Okay, yeah, I knew I'd read it somewhere.
Yeah.
I've just got so many drafts, I can't remember which one it is anymore.
Why would we not just want to have the first part of the first sentence, occupants or guests, short-term rentals should not park vehicles on the property other than within parking areas, and then pick up the last sentence, which vehicles parked in public right of way so as to violate town street will be towed.
Well, part of it is so that we know that they have enough from the beginning, because there are impervious surface in their water supply watershed.
Right.
Okay, and so if they have 1 per bedroom, then, I mean, I don't want them to build a parking lot.
Because if they start parking on air, like grass yard stuff,
It
becomes impervious.
becomes impervious.
Well, but then you know, we're saying
Instead of putting it on a
parking areas designated and then a period there with the parking areas designated, drop the short-term rental zoning compliance permit and all that other verbiage. You park in the parking area, you know, if it's in the front yard, that's not the parking area. And you don't park in the street. And if you bring in a XL Suburban, you might get 1, but if you bring in 2 VW Bugs or 3 VW Bugs, you might get 3.
Yeah,
I
as
think
long as it accomplishes the same thing. which is not having them parking all over the streets and other people's yards.
But I also think it's not a situation where we ought to say bedrooms equals vehicles.
Just like designated spots, just parking.
Yeah, just, no parking in the front yard, don't get off the pavement, don't get off the gravel, whatever is the designated parking.
Rather than a number. or an
Yeah,
area.
because somebody, suburban can bring in a whole lot of folks, can bring in a
Well,
household full of
The
folks.
designated impervious
We-
service.
We talked about that because sometimes they're just going to be rentals to families and you're going to have one car. You got parents and 3 kids, but they all come in the same car because they're all under 10. Nobody else can drive. So yeah, I agree. If you just have them in these designated areas rather than a number per bedroom is what you're
Yeah,
saying.
and it's,
Yeah, and they could be a large tract, and they could have
That will work.
several parking
Okay.
areas.
So we want to see that change made.
Yeah.
Clarified.
But
Okay. Other questions?
just designate parking areas, period, right? And then you go down to the next or well, in compliance with the vehicle ordinance of 9. And then vehicles parked in public right of way will be towed. So rather than put a number on it, just strike that application of the short-term rental zoning compliance permit.
Okay. Other questions? I have some more questions. Some
Okay.
things we've touched upon before, but we need to, I think, put them on the table again. The issue of honoring contracts prior to adoption. For example, let's say we say no new STRs September 15th. What about the booking issue where somebody will say, well, look, I was doing my renovation. I've got the bookings. Why can't I be included in the group that is allowed to do STRs? We've had that similar kind of thing brought up before.
Well, part of that was brought up because we were saying no increase in what you've done in the past. We're not saying that anymore. In other words, they were saying, okay, I just started 2 months ago and I've got bookings for the next.
They're in the house. They're allowed to continue for that 3-year period.
Yeah, but we also said, I've got a September 15th opening date and I've got bookings on there. And we said, well, if you've got bookings, then you are basically, if you're open for, I don't know, I went back and forth whether you had to have your CO or whether you just had to have bookings. But part of that was, we were talking about it was because we didn't want them to increase the problems by, if they'd been open 6 months and they had bookings for 6 months, then that was all they got, as opposed to they could go on and advertise, but we're not doing that anymore.
Okay, let me rephrase it. What happens when somebody comes in and says, look, I started this renovation because my intention was to do STRs. And I have them booked for October, but now y'all cut this date of September the 15th. What am I going to do?
Unfortunately, I think you'd have to honor that, would you not?
I think what we talked about, and I talked about this was justice, this is an interpretation of it. If you have bookings, you honor the bookings, and it means that you are actually but we can put the 15th and we can use our software to say who has bookings and who doesn't have bookings. The problem is the person who says, okay, I intended to do this. Maybe I did and maybe I didn't truly intend to do this, but I want to keep my option open. And so now I'm going to say I'm going to be an STR and you have to let me.
Well, and it also gets into where do you draw the line? Because some people could say, well, I just bought this house in May and I was planning on doing this. I just haven't gotten around to it. In that case, they're out of luck.
Yeah.
Right, because we've been discussing this for over a year.
Okay.
So, yeah, if they bought it in May, that's on them not doing their due diligence.
So what I'm hearing you say is that we need to probably examine this idea of the booking issue and get clarified on that.
Well, I think our software can tell us on the 16th who has bookings and who doesn't have bookings.
If the bookings were made prior to the 15th, but they might be for October.
Right. If they're on the
you-
books or
you
if they are
are.
reservations.
Okay, all right, okay.
But if you look under section 6.518B, it says short-term rentals in operation as of, well, this is September 15th. That's basically whatever date that you approve the amendments.
I think the
But is
interpretation is.
In operation as of that date.
But is
So
the
if you're
operation-
saying that it's people that wanted to do it,
The
they
nuance,
just didn't get their remodels done or whatever till after, they wouldn't be allowed to rent.
I agree, but the nuance of in operation, if they've started taking bookings, they're kind of de facto in operation.
What if they're taking bookings for 2024?
Chad, do you
Yeah.
have an opinion on that?
I mean, I think you could certainly interpret in operation to mean, that you have bookings in place prior to the effective date of the ordinance. You could certainly clarify it to allow those folks that who had bookings or reservations prior to the effective date to honor those. I think that's appropriate.
Could you work on a kind of a verbiage on that and some limitations and bring it back to us?
Sure.
Okay. Because I know that's going to be an issue. And then I have one other issue, and I'm going to bring it up, and it might be a can of worms, or the board might just say, nah, we're not going there. But on our corridors, and we've talked about this, we have kind of a mixed development of business and residential areas. And the corridors that I'm talking about is US 64, NC 106, and NC 28. And what I did yesterday, I drove those corridors and kind of noticed there's kind of this mixed use combination. And I came away with the idea, and I know it might be controversial, but if someone has a house on those corridors, it might be classified as R1 or R2, but in a way it's kind of disconnected from a developed neighborhood. They're just on that corridor. And my idea is that if you have a house on one of those corridors where you have a direct access driveway out onto the highway, that we might want to consider allowing SDRs, creating an SDR residential zone on those highways or something, because they're right there on the highway, very limited in access and
Yeah,
everything,
exactly. That's what I was
especially
gonna
into a
say. I
neighborhood.
thought about the same thing, but I don't think that we need to address that now, because there are
Okay.
certainly places that are close to town, they're not necessarily on a corridor, that would make great kind of, B2A areas that
Yep.
would be short-term rentals,
Okay.
but that is something that it would entail looking at the entire town, which
we've talked about before.
exactly,
Planning of
in some of those
rezoning a lot of
things,
areas in town, so,
making distinctions
for
like that.
positive
But so, yeah,
Okay.
I agree that that's something that we should look at. I just don't think that we can do that right now
Okay,
if we're
well,
ever going to
I
get
think that's
anything.
I think it's good that
completely
we brought it
different
up.
thing. It's
Yes.
something we've discussed before in planning stuff. as
And,
far as
and I was
rezoning
riding down the
areas
road
and stuff.
counting, I think that there's probably about 60 residences
Right.
in play on all of them. And in some places like 28, there's hardly any
Yeah.
that I could count, but that's something we can consider. Okay, fair enough.
But again, those are the kind of things that we look at. I mean, one of the things that came out of the comprehensive study is the businesses wanted more short-term rentals close to town, because parking is already the limiting factor for their business. And so short-term rentals out don't help them at all, because they can't the short-term rental people have to use a car to get in town, and that's their limiting factor anyway. But close to town may actually be something that would be something that we needed to look at within walking distance. And then how you define what walking distance is, I don't know, but that would be something that you could look at too, not just on the corridors, but within a walking distance to town,
Okay.
to the central business district, let's say, not just to the town limits.
Okay. Any more questions or comments from the board to our legal team?
Chad, at the last meeting, I had a question about whether if we amortize and it's 2 years, 3 years or whatever, and it's 3 years, can they wait till 35 months after it's passed to challenge it? Or do they have to challenge it within a specific period of time? Because if they challenge it, then they would get a stay, and, we might be 5 years down the road.
Yeah, so under state law, there's a statute of limitations of 1 year to substantively challenge an ordinance. And then it's 3 years if there's been some procedural defect. I had it flipped when I told you at the last meeting. So, a legal challenge to the ordinance, I think would substantively to substantive provisions would need to be within 1 year.
Okay.
Okay. And I have one other question relating to that. And I know there's some controversy about the amortization, whether it can be done and whether it can't. And I think eventually the courts might be the people that make that decision. But let's say we go through this process and it is overturned. Does that then basically defer to the fact that we would then be grandfathering the SDRs prior to September 15th, 2022? Does that just automatically, you think, become a part of the ordinance? Or would we have to go back and rethink that whole scenario? One option would just to be allow everyone to have SDRs anywhere.
Yeah, so I think that, what you're doing with this ordinance is defining the use, establishing what districts it can go in, and there would be non-conforming uses created, and you're then amortizing them over some period. If the amortization was, for whatever reason, not allowed, then you would still have them as non-conforming uses subject to your non-conforming use provisions in your current ordinance.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments or questions? Then I think the next step, Chad and Jay, if this can be done as soon as possible, is to kind of incorporate the concerns that we had in this work session and reissue another draft to the board, and we will share it with the public when we get it. That is kind of updating some of those concerns that were covered tonight. Is that the feeling of everybody on the board? Yep. And then the next time that we would review this draft ordinance would be at the September official regular meeting
Next
which
week.
will be next Thursday, right here, 7 o'clock. That's the feeling of the board.
Yep.
Okay. Jay and Chad, do you have any more comments or questions to the board?
No, maybe just a point of clarification for me. On the tourist home issue, you want us to provide you some options, but not draft anything at this point, or just so I'm clear?
I think what I would like is not necessarily you to provide options, but tell us what options we have. Number of bedrooms, I don't know exactly what it is, but you can do it this way or this way, and not necessarily say the specifics of it. Just give us a good idea of what our options are, but not necessarily the specific options. Do you understand what I'm saying? Maybe I don't understand what I'm saying.
No, I think there's a wide degree of options that you have. We can certainly lay some out for you to consider. I mean, I think it's, obviously, how many bedrooms do you want to allow with the use, and what districts and what permit, whether it's a special use or limited use, I think there's all those options available. We can kind of give you a menu of options for you to consider and make some decisions on if that's what you're looking for.
Okay.
Yeah. So we know what we do have, what are options that we can do, what specifics options. I can do this way or this way. And then this thing, I can do this way or this way. And then this thing, I can do this way or this way, as opposed to just 8 bedrooms, 4 bedrooms. Don't give me specifics. Just give me, I can decide the number of bedrooms. I can decide if it's a special use permit. I can decide those kind of things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, good.
Well, I think, Amy, our previous or existing ordinance defines tourist homes as 4 bedrooms lettable. The owner must live in the 5th, so to speak. And that, as I understood it, coincided exactly with the state's definition of tourist homes.
At the time.
I think
At
we
the
need a
time.
clarification.
At the time, I
Yeah.
couldn't find in the amount of time yesterday, in looking through this, I could not find the state definition of tourist home anywhere. And I don't know if they've done away with it. If they've done away with it,
But
that's fine. Then I think we ought to stick with.
But I think what the distinction was, as Chad was saying, is ours is for the zoning distinction. And we don't have to follow the states, because the states is for public health. And so they're using public health criteria to decide how many and what their designation is. We're using zoning. Okay. So if they meet whatever the state statute is, then they have to go under the public health things. If they don't, they don't. But we're doing it for zoning.
We can be more strict and not less.
Well, one of the things the School of Government had a comment on this, the definitions between the bed and breakfast home, and bed and breakfast inn, specifically was, I think, in their opinion, so that tourist homes could get an operating permit, and I may have read this wrong, could get an operating permit as the 4 bedrooms, but not having to meet the bed and breakfast inn or home definition. I know that sounds,
Yeah, no, I understand that.
okay, wow.
I think we ought to let the
But that
attorneys do the work, research on this.
just
come back
means that
with
if we kept it at 4, then they don't have to go up to those things. If we allowed 8, whatever, then if they wanted to, then they would have to go under those regulations.
Yeah.
So we're not telling them where they do or don't. We're just telling them, are we going to even allow them to even have to go back to those regulations? I thought it was still 4. See, that's what I was thinking.
And I've always assumed that, I know we're still 4, but I just couldn't find anything in the state statute.
Well, I knew there was a general statute, but I couldn't remember which one it was.
Well, I never knew, so
Okay.
good for you. Okay.
All right. Any more comments? I'm raising the gavel and I'm considering entertaining a motion to adjourn this work session.
So move.
All in favor?
All right.
Thank you. We're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Jay.
You're welcome.